Hello, my name is Oliver. I'm 25 and I work in Portland as a software designer. Life has a way of keeping you busy, predictable, until a simple smile changes everything. Last New Year's Eve, my neighbor asked me something I never expected. Want to celebrate New Year, just the two of us? Her words felt harmless at first, but the way she looked at me, it was like she could see everything I'd been holding back. That night, everything shifted. The air between us became electric, every glance loaded with things neither of us dared to say. Tonight, I'm taking you through that night, the tension, the longing, and the moments that made it impossible to walk away. Stay with me, because this story isn't just about one night. It's about desire, hesitation, and the kind of connection that lingers long after the clock strikes 12. The smile came first, quiet, unguarded, and far too knowing for a cold December night. It lingered across the narrow space between us like a held breath, the kind that warms your skin before you realize you're leaning closer. Outside, fireworks were being tested early, sharp pops echoing down the street. But inside that moment there was only the hum of the heater and the way her eyes refused to let mine go. When she asked, softly, "Want to celebrate New Year, just the two of us?" The words felt heavier than they should have, as if they carried months of unsaid things wrapped in a single question. We'd been neighbors long enough to learn each other's rhythms. The morning nods by the mailboxes, the polite hellos over the fence, the shared laughter when the power went out last winter and we stood in the dark hallway, phone lights bouncing off the walls. We knew enough to be comfortable and just enough to be dangerous. Familiarity has a way of lowering your guard, of making you forget the quiet rules you didn't know you were following. And that night, with the calendar about to turn and the year feeling unfinished, the rules felt thinner than ever. She stood in the doorway of her apartment, coat half unbuttoned, scarf loose at her throat. Snow clung to the edges of her boots, melting into small crescent moons on the floor. The hallway light traced the line of her shoulder, paused at her collarbone, then slipped away. I noticed the details the way you do when something matters. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the small crease between her brows when she waited for an answer, the patience in her posture that suggested she already knew the question would change something. There had always been a pause between us, an invisible line we never crossed. Maybe it was timing, maybe it was fear, maybe it was the comfort of knowing someone is there without asking more of them. But pauses can turn into pressure, and pressure looks for release. That night, it felt like the air itself was leaning in, urging us to stop pretending we didn't hear the undercurrent in our conversations, the warmth that followed every accidental touch. I thought of the year behind me, of nights spent alone with noise filling the silence, of promises made to myself and quietly broken. I thought of the year ahead, blank and open, waiting to be written by small decisions that add up to everything. Her gaze didn't rush me. It invited me. It said there was time, even if the clock insisted otherwise. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. A laugh floated up from the street below. Life continued, indifferent to the moment gathering between us. And still, there we were, two people standing on the edge of something unnamed, aware of the weight of choosing yes or no. Because sometimes the most dangerous celebrations aren't loud or crowded. Sometimes they're quiet, private, and full of possibility. As midnight crept closer, I realized the question wasn't really about New Year's at all. It was about what we'd been avoiding, about whether comfort could become courage, about whether we'd let the past year end the way it began, safe, contained, unfinished, or whether we'd step into the unknown together, even if only for one night. Her smile didn't waver. The fireworks cracked again, closer this time, and in that narrow space between us, the countdown began. The hallway clock clicked softly as the second hand slid forward, each movement loud in the quiet between us. I became suddenly aware of how close we were standing. Close enough to notice the faint scent of citrus and winter on her coat. Close enough that if either of us shifted, something would happen. She glanced past me for a moment, as if checking for witnesses, then back again, her smile smaller now, more careful. The question she'd asked still hovered between us, unanswered, growing warmer by the second. "Come in," she said at last. Not a command, not a plea, just an opening. She stepped aside, and the space she made felt deliberate. I crossed the threshold with the strange sensation of crossing more than a doorway. Her apartment was quiet, softly lit, the kind of quiet that invites honesty. A string of warm lights traced the edge of the window, and outside, snow fell slow and patient, like it had all the time in the world. We stood there awkwardly for a beat, shoes still on, coats half open, neither of us ready to fully arrive. She brushed past me toward the window, and her sleeve grazed my wrist. It was an accident, nothing more, but my breath caught anyway. She noticed. I could tell by the way her shoulders tightened, just slightly, before she pretended to focus on the street below. "I didn't think you'd actually say yes," she admitted, voice low. There was a vulnerability there that shifted something in my chest. Wanting is one thing, being wanted back is another. "I didn't think you'd ask," I replied. The truth felt safer in this light. She laughed quietly at that, then turned, folding her arms as if to hold herself steady. For a moment we just looked at each other. No rush, no music, just the soft hum of the city and the shared awareness that we were standing in a moment neither of us could rewind. I noticed the way her eyes softened when they met mine, how her confidence seemed to falter when she realized she was being seen just as clearly as she saw me. There were things we didn't say, names of people who might complicate this, reasons we'd kept our distance before. History has a way of pressing in when you least want it to. I felt it too, that invisible hand on my shoulder, reminding me of consequences, of lines crossed once and regretted later. And yet, standing there, those warnings felt quieter than the pull drawing us together. She poured 2 glasses of something simple, nothing celebratory, nothing planned. Our fingers brushed again when she handed one to me. This time, neither of us pretended not to notice. She didn't pull away immediately. Neither did I. The contact lasted only a second longer than necessary, but it was enough to send a question through both of us. We moved to the couch, leaving space between us at first, an unspoken compromise. Conversation came easily and carefully, circling harmless topics. Weather, resolutions, things we pretended mattered more than the charged silence threading through every pause. When she spoke, she leaned in without realizing it. When I responded, my voice dropped, as if the room required it. At some point, the countdowns began on televisions across the city. We didn't turn one on. Instead, we listened to the distant noise rise and fall, the sound of other people rushing toward midnight together. She tucked her feet beneath her, angling toward me now, our knees almost touching. Almost. "I don't want this to be a mistake," she said quietly, eyes searching my face. "I know," I answered, and I did. That was the problem. Wanting something doesn't make it simple. It just makes it honest. Her hand rested on the cushion between us, palm open, close enough that I could feel the heat from it. Not touching, but waiting. Midnight drew nearer. Fireworks bloomed in the distance, lighting the room in brief flashes of color. And there we were, suspended in the seconds before everything changes, knowing that whatever we chose next would echo long after the new year began. The room felt smaller now, though nothing had changed. The couch, the soft rug, the flickering city lights through the window, it was all the same. Yet somehow every detail pressed closer, tighter, as if the space between us was shrinking on its own. I could see it in the way she shifted on the cushion, the subtle tilt of her head, the pause in her breathing that hinted at the thoughts she refused to voice. And I knew I was doing the same, caught in a loop of wanting and holding back. We spoke again, cautiously, circling lighter topics to hide the heavier ones. But every laugh, every glance, every small movement felt charged with something unsaid. Her fingers brushed the edge of her glass when she lifted it, just grazing mine. I didn't pull away immediately, neither did she. That small contact, fleeting and innocent, carried the weight of every suppressed feeling between us. I felt the thrum of my own pulse in my ears, a quiet drum matching hers. Her eyes flicked toward me, searching, questioning, and I realized that whatever restraint we had was fragile. Too long, too careful, we had built walls around ourselves, walls of past mistakes, missed timing, unspoken rules. And yet, here in this quiet, those walls felt thinner than the paper of the calendar hanging in the hall. Every brush of her hand, every shift in posture, seemed designed to test how much we could bear without crossing the line. "I didn't think we'd actually get here," she said, voice low, almost vulnerable, carrying a tension that made my chest ache. "I mean, just the two of us. Here. Now." "I know," I replied softly, the truth heavy and warm between us. I wanted to add more. I wanted to say that it had been on my mind for months, that the sight of her coat in the hallway made me think of her differently every time. But something stopped me. Not fear exactly. More like reverence, for the moment, for her, for the fragile possibility of everything yet untouched. Her gaze dropped briefly to her hands, fingers intertwined in a self-soothing knot. I noticed the faint tremor in her knuckles. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was me. Or maybe it was the same pull I felt in my chest. A dangerous, delicious need to lean in, to close the distance, to see if the sparks could catch fire. But neither of us moved. We lingered in the possibilities that hovered just beyond reach. The truth was, both of us carried baggage. Stories from the past that made this moment complicated. Things unsaid. Promises to ourselves, perhaps to others. And yet, in the quiet warmth of her apartment, those obstacles seemed distant, almost negotiable. The air was thick with want, but also with caution, as if acknowledging the heat too openly would break the spell. I shifted slightly on the couch, my knee brushing hers. A simple, accidental motion, but it jolted awareness through both of us. She stiffened for a fraction of a second, then relaxed, letting her shoulder drop. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world outside ceased to exist. I wanted to say her name, to reach for her hand, to let the longing that had been simmering for months finally spill out. But instead, I stayed still, holding back. She did too. Not from lack of desire, but because the desire itself was almost too much to bear. Outside, distant fireworks crackled again, echoing faintly through the night. Inside, the room held its own quiet explosions. The brush of a sleeve, the subtle inhalation of breath, the pause in a laugh that lingered too long. We were both caught in that exquisite tension, the kind that makes you want someone more than you're ready to admit, the kind that makes every small gesture a charged confession. She leaned back slightly, as if to create space, but her gaze never left me. I did the same, though my heart was aching to close the gap. We were prisoners of our own longing, architects of walls we didn't quite know how to dismantle. Yet, somehow, in the restraint, in the unspoken words, the tension deepened, richer, almost tangible. It was a quiet seduction of glances and gestures, a dance with no choreography but complete understanding. Neither of us spoke, and yet the silence itself was thick with confession. Every moment stretched, lingered, teasing the edge of something inevitable. Our hearts were racing in tandem, the room alive with the unclaimed weight of what could be. And as she shifted again, letting her hand rest just a whisper away from mine, I felt it. This is the kind of moment that doesn't come often. The kind that asks everything from you while giving nothing at all. The quiet stretched, heavy and taut, as if the apartment itself were holding its breath. Each flicker of the string lights cast tiny shadows across her face, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the delicate line of her jaw. I noticed how her eyes seemed to catch every reflection, luminous and searching. We had been talking, or maybe just existing in the same space, for what felt like hours, but the words had begun to thin, leaving behind only the charged hum of proximity. The air between us carried the weight of everything unspoken, every suppressed feeling now vibrating in the quiet. She leaned slightly forward, elbows resting on her knees, her gaze never leaving mine. The subtle tilt of her head was both an invitation and a challenge, a silent question I didn't know how to answer. My hand twitched slightly in my lap, aware that the smallest movement could close the gap or shatter the fragile balance. The almost touch, the space between our hands, was its own universe, electric, alive, impossible to ignore. Every nerve seemed attuned to the smallest signal from her, every glance magnified, every breath measured. "I've wanted to say something for a long time," she murmured, voice low, trembling just enough to betray the calm she tried to maintain. Her words hung between us, barely louder than the distant fireworks outside. My chest tightened. I had imagined her saying this countless times, but hearing it, soft, hesitant, real, made the room shrink to the span of her presence. My heart thudded in my ears, loud enough I feared she could hear it. "And what's that?" I asked, careful to keep my voice steady, though the tension made it betray me anyway. She didn't answer immediately. She only blinked, biting her lip in a way that made me painfully aware of every subtle movement. Time seemed suspended, the seconds stretching longer and longer, each one filled with unspoken confession. Finally, she leaned just a fraction closer, her shoulder brushing mine, a contact so fleeting it could have been accidental, but her intent was unmistakable. My hand itched to lift, to rest somewhere safe and deliberate against hers, to erase the space that had existed between us for far too long. And yet, I waited, drawn into the gravity of her proximity, caught in the pull that neither of us dared fully surrender to. She began again, voice trembling, then faltered. I could see the restraint in her eyes, the way she willed herself to stop before crossing some invisible line. My own restraint mirrored hers. I wanted to close the distance, to lean into her warmth, to let every careful boundary dissolve. But part of me held back, not from lack of desire, but because the intensity of the moment demanded respect. We had been dancing around this tension for months, and now that it hung over us like a storm, to rush would be sacrilege. The room felt electric. Every small movement, her hand shifting slightly on the cushion, the brush of my sleeve as I adjusted my position, was amplified, a current running through both of us. We were aware of each other in ways words could never capture. The subtle rise and fall of her chest, the way her gaze flickered toward my lips for a fraction of a second, the soft inhalation she tried to disguise. I felt every inch of the distance, every heartbeat, every restraint, and it burned. Her whisper came again, barely audible over the hum of the city outside. "I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." The confession was simple, fragile, and it hit harder than I expected. My breath caught, and the silence that followed was thick, heavy, all-encompassing. It didn't need an answer. In that moment, in the charged stillness, it was understood. Desire, longing, hesitation, all wrapped into one electric pulse bridging the gap between us. I leaned slightly toward her, she toward me. Fingers trembled just above each other, almost brushing, hovering in a space that existed solely for anticipation. The world outside, the approaching new year, even the distant fireworks seemed irrelevant. Nothing mattered beyond this suspended second. The room vibrated with what could happen, what might never happen, and yet the intensity of it left both of us trembling. And then we stopped, suspended in that perfect tension. Nothing more. The whisper, the near touch, the shared breath. They had said everything without needing to. The space between us was no longer empty. It was alive, electric, dangerous in its restraint. Time slowed to allow the weight of every emotion, every desire, every unspoken word to settle into the air between us. The next moment could change everything, but for now, we held the precipice together, silently acknowledging the depth of what neither of us could yet name. The apartment had transformed into a world of its own that night, warm, intimate, suspended from the ordinary. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window, a soft percussion that set the rhythm for everything inside. The lights were dim, just enough to highlight the contours of her face, the way her hair fell across her shoulders, and the faint shimmer of moisture on the window pane reflecting the glow of streetlights. Every detail felt sharper, every sound closer, every breath heavier. We had drifted closer without noticing, drawn together by months of suppressed longing and shared glances that had spoken volumes. Her presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore, and yet it wasn't about moving fast. It was about finally allowing the tension that had built for months to settle into something tangible, something that could no longer be denied. "I've been waiting for this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle rhythm of the rain. Her eyes held a mixture of surrender and anticipation, like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to dive but savoring the moment before the fall. My hand lifted, almost of its own accord, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her breath caught at the contact, and suddenly, the space between us felt smaller than it had ever been. Our fingers touched, not in a grasp, not in a gesture of control, but as if our hands recognized each other after years of near misses. The warmth from her skin seeped into mine, carrying the weight of every unspoken word. In that moment, the apartment felt infinite, time bending around the two of us. Every inhale, every exhale was synchronized, a secret language that only we understood. Her breath melted into mine as we drew impossibly close, a whisper of movement that felt like a confession. Our bodies, still barely touching, spoke the words we hadn't dared to say. Longing, desire, need, and the ache of patience that had lasted too long. The warmth of her arm against mine was a quiet declaration, the press of our shoulders a gentle answer to questions left unasked. I could feel the rise and fall of her chest against mine, soft yet insistent, and I realized that every barrier we had constructed had dissolved in the quiet intimacy of this night. There was no rush, there was no urgency, just the heady sweetness of connection, of closeness that felt electric yet safe. Every heartbeat seemed to echo through the apartment, through the rain outside, and through the slow pulse of our shared space. "I never thought it could feel like this," she murmured, a shiver threading through her words. "And neither had I, not until now, not until we let go of restraint and allowed the current between us to speak for itself." My thumb brushed her hand. Her fingers responded in kind, tentative at first, then firmer, until it became impossible to separate the small act from the intensity that hung in the air. The rain outside thickened, a soft curtain against the world beyond, cocooning us in privacy. I felt the heat radiating from her, a magnetic pull that made each breath heavier, each second more significant. Our foreheads rested together, and the silence became a symphony, each exhale carrying what our voices could not. There was longing, yes, but also relief and joy, and something tender that made every restraint worthwhile. We moved as though in slow motion, not in haste but in reverence, letting the anticipation stretch, letting every small contact linger. Her cheek brushed mine, a soft affirmation of presence. Our hands intertwined gently, a signal that the unspoken was finally mutual. The room hummed with the electricity of intimacy, with every subtle gesture magnified by months of restraint. And then, for a moment, the world fell away entirely. There was no hallway, no snow, no distant fireworks, no year about to begin. There was only the quiet rain, the soft light, the warmth between us, and the unbroken understanding that some things don't need to be said. They need to be felt. Every breath, every heartbeat, every lingering touch was a poem written in the language of closeness, passion, and tenderness. That night, we didn't rush. We didn't speak. We simply existed, skin against skin, hearts aligned, souls leaning into a truth that had been waiting patiently for morning arrived quietly, not with fireworks or fanfare, but with the soft gray light of winter sneaking through the rain-streaked windows. The apartment was hushed, almost sacred in its stillness. We sat side by side on the couch, not touching yet unwilling to move apart, the space between us charged with the echo of last night's confession. The warmth we had shared was gone from our skin, but it lingered in our hearts, invisible yet undeniable. Neither of us spoke at first. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was loaded, full of the weight of realization and the tremor of something deeper. I traced the edge of the coffee table absently, pretending not to notice the way her eyes lingered on my profile. She toyed with the edge of her sleeve, tugging it nervously, as if trying to ground herself in the mundane while her mind replayed the previous night in slow motion. "I didn't expect it to feel like that," she said finally, voice soft and uncertain. Her words were careful, but they carried the tremor of honesty. I nodded, letting her observation hang between us. It was enough. It was honest. We had crossed lines we'd spent months guarding. Yet the aftermath was messy, in the way emotions always are when you let your walls fall. Guilt flirted with excitement. Uncertainty brushed against relief. And beneath it all was the quiet thrill of connection. I didn't know if it was love or something else entirely, but I knew that the night had changed us, irreversibly. A subtle tension lingered in the air, the kind that comes from having shared something raw and intimate without needing to define it. We were both aware that life outside the apartment hadn't paused. There were obligations, routines, moments that would demand clarity. But for now, we existed in the fragile cocoon of aftermath, where glances and gestures carried the weight of unspoken understanding. She leaned slightly toward me, not in a push for closeness, but as if proximity could offer reassurance without words. Our hands brushed again on the couch, light and almost accidental, yet deliberate enough to remind us that the bridge between us was still alive. We laughed quietly at a shared memory from last night, a simple, fleeting moment that somehow carried the depth of all we hadn't said. And then, as if the universe wanted to remind us that life was not merely the slow unfolding of emotional clarity, the doorbell rang. Startled, we exchanged a glance. Eyes wide, hearts still thudding with residual heat from the night before. Neither of us had expected visitors, and the sudden intrusion felt like a jolt back to reality. I moved to answer it, and there, standing in the hallway, was a familiar face neither of us had anticipated, her older brother, holding a small box of pastries with a warm, teasing smile. "Thought I'd drop by early," he said, oblivious to the storm of tension lingering in the apartment. His presence was innocent, but it cracked the cocoon we had built, forcing us both to navigate normalcy while carrying the weight of what had just happened. She covered a small, amused gasp with a laugh, her fingers grazing mine once more as we both shifted nervously. The contact was brief, fleeting, but it reminded us that the connection forged last night wasn't erased. It persisted, stubborn and tender, threading through even the intrusion of the everyday. The breakfast conversation was simple, filled with mundane topics, but beneath it ran a quiet undercurrent of acknowledgement. We had crossed a threshold, and nothing could undo it. I noticed the way she caught my eye across the table, a half-smile playing at her lips, a silent reminder of the intimacy and trust that had blossomed overnight. I felt a response in my chest, a soft, steady thrum of something permanent, hope, perhaps, or the first true awareness of attachment. When her brother finally left, the apartment returned to its quiet intimacy, the rain soft against the windows. We sat together again, closer this time, letting the silence wrap around us in a gentle embrace. There were no words needed. We had navigated the aftermath, messy though it was, and emerged on the other side with a connection that had deepened, tempered by the vulnerability we had shared. I reached for her hand deliberately, intertwining fingers, letting the warmth of our joined touch speak for what neither of us could articulate. Her gaze met mine, steady and unafraid, and in that glance was everything we needed. Acknowledgement, desire, and the quiet promise that, whatever tomorrow brought, this night, this connection, would linger real, unspoken, and alive. The evening sky had softened into muted shades of blue and gray, the rain now just a gentle whisper against the window. Inside, the apartment felt like a sanctuary, the air thick with the quiet aftermath of a night that had changed everything. We sat close, shoulders brushing, the lingering warmth between us a comfort neither of us wanted to name aloud. The world outside moved on, but in this room, time slowed, giving space for reflection, for the tenderness that had grown quietly over months to bloom fully. Her head found its resting place on my shoulder, and I felt the subtle rise and fall of her breathing against my chest. It was not a rushed intimacy but a slow, deliberate acknowledgement of connection, of trust, of something deeper than desire. Our hands intertwined naturally, fingers lacing together without thought, a simple gesture loaded with meaning. We didn't need words. Every heartbeat, every glance, every brush of skin carried the story that had been building since we first met. Awkward smiles, lingering touches, the almost that had defined our relationship until now. "I don't want this night to end," she murmured softly, her voice just audible over the quiet hum of the city. "It doesn't have to," I replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face, letting my thumb linger on her cheek. My lips followed the curve gently, resting on her forehead. She shivered slightly, a soft sound escaping her lips, and I knew that the warmth between us had reached a place of peace, not urgency. This was more than desire, it was comfort, it was acceptance. It was the slow, satisfying certainty of being seen and choosing to stay seen. The apartment smelled faintly of rain, coffee, and the lingering trace of her perfume, a delicate scent that clung to the air like a memory. Outside, the world moved toward its routine, but inside, there was only us. Two people who had dared to cross invisible lines and had found that the distance between them was not frightening but necessary to recognize the weight of what they shared. We talked quietly then, low murmurs about trivial things, laughter occasionally slipping in, but always close to silence. Each word was soft, deliberate, carrying the intimacy of shared understanding. There were no confessions left unspoken. We had said everything through actions, through presence, through the steady, unbreakable acknowledgement that whatever had started as curiosity, as tension, as longing had matured into something real. I noticed the way she relaxed into me, the way her hand fit against mine, the subtle comfort of her warmth. It was not passionate in the way the night before had been. It was calmer, steadier, a choice, not a surrender. And I realized that love, if that's what this was, didn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes, it came with quiet moments like this, where two hearts simply chose to exist in the same space, in the same reality, acknowledging a bond forged in patience and understanding. The rain slowed to a drizzle, leaving faint droplets on the glass. We leaned back, her forehead still resting on mine, our breaths sinking effortlessly. We stayed like that, letting the weight of the world fade, choosing the present, choosing each other. No words were necessary to seal it. The quiet understanding, the gentle intimacy, the slow warmth of closeness said everything. And yet, there was a lingering possibility for those who might leave this moment behind. For some, parting would be inevitable, the memory lingering like perfume, a sweet trace that never fully leaves. But for us, tonight, we stayed. We stayed because the risk of letting go was too heavy, because the reward of keeping this connection was undeniable. The night had ended, but the story, our story, had only deepened. I kissed her gently again, a soft brush on her lips, and then rested my forehead against hers, holding the moment as long as I could. Her eyes closed, a soft sigh escaping her. And in that sigh, I felt every word, every touch, every quiet longing settle into peace. Outside, the rain continued to patter gently, but inside, everything was still. Everything was warm. Everything was exactly as it should be. If you're ready to feel every heartbeat, every stolen glance, and every moment of tension, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a second of this story. Trust me, you'll want to see how it all unfolds.